Welcome to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, where we sit down with the people who give shape, texture, and voice to life on the North Fork of Long Island. Some are rooted here by generations, others arrive by chance or choice, but all carry with them a piece of the story. We talk about what's changing, what's worth holding on to, and the currents of history, both quiet and loud, that run through this place. I'm your host, Christopher Bianchi, and for episode 148, we sit down with Mark MacNish, Executive Director of the Cutchogue, New Suffolk Historical Council and Museum. Mark has deep roots on the North Fork with a family history that stretches back to the era of the New Suffolk Hotel and the heyday of the region's hospitality scene. His lifelong connection to local history, paired with his passion for bringing the past to life, sometimes literally as a colonial gentleman at community events, has made him a key voice in preserving and sharing the stories of our area. In this conversation, we'll explore his own background growing up on the North Fork, the role of places like the New Suffolk Hotel in shaping community life, the surprising history of other gathering spots and hotels in the region, and the exciting projects he's leading today to keep that history alive for the future generations. So I hope you enjoy episode 148 with Mark MacNish. This episode was recorded May 9th, 2025. Thank you so much for coming on the Floyd Memorial Library podcast today. I'm looking forward to talking with you today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Definitely. And just in the beginning, I usually like to start off with if you can just give us a little introduction about yourself, where you were born and raised.
I was born in Greenport, Eastern Long Island Hospital. I was raised in the house my great-grandfather built in Cutchogue and went to Mattituck High School.
And how far back can you trace your ancestry on the North Fork?
Well, my father's family, the MacNishes, came from Scotland in 1820. Robert MacNish had a confectionery shop in Sag Harbor. They moved to Brooklyn, and then they moved back out to New Suffolk. His grandmother's side, he's descended from the Edwards of East Hampton. They're well-known there as a whaling family, and they came in 1658 from Lynn, Massachusetts, and so they're kind of early settlers. And on my mother's side, she's descendant from the Duriers, Bergens, and Wyckoffs that were Dutch or Huguenots that settled in Mattituck in around 1850, and her family was kind of known for founding Mattituck. Peter Wyckoff started the Cauliflower Association. He built the hardware store on the corner of Love Lane and Pike. And they were just significant members of the Mattituck community in the mid-1800s. And her father was John Montgomery, who was the pastor of the Methodist Church in Southold, and then he became the president of the Southold Savings Bank. So those are my roots.
Wow. And the one you just mentioned, that was on your mother's side. And did you get to meet any of your grandparents?
Yes, I knew all of my grandparents.
Wow.
Yeah.
Did you have the opportunity to talk with them or ask them questions about their time growing up?
It's funny because that generation really didn't talk much about their history. They were kind of focused on the present, I guess. And when you're a kid, you don't really think to ask them a lot. So I remember things like my grandfather. My mom used to take him shopping in New Suffolk, and he we used to drive through New Suffolk, and he used to point out, places that were significant to him. He used to tell us stories because his father and mother were chefs, and they ended up all over on the North Fork. And he actually spent a large portion of his life growing up on Robbins Island. So he would tell stories about having to go to school by rowboat. And when the bay froze, he used to walk across the bay to go to New Suffolk School. So yeah, that in that respect, he would tell stories. But, going back any further than, him is, he rarely, there were some old, family tales that they used to repeat, most of which I found out were distorted or weren't true.
Yeah.
So, it's hard. They had these little things that they clung on to that just weren't maybe necessarily true. But
And then on your father's side, you said did they start in Sag Harbor first before?
They actually came from Scotland through Massachusetts, and then he got they were bakers. They, I guess, left Scotland because after the Battle of Culloden, the English kind of really screwed things up for people that were working in the trades in Scotland, and that was one of the reasons they left. And then he came here with his wife-to-be, Jane Simpson, and they started a confectionery shop in Sag Harbor. And then he died young, leaving Jane with 3 children. And Jane went to Brooklyn and started a bakery there. And like most people of that time, we're talking about the mid-1800s, she married very quickly because she had 3 children to support. And she became Jane Hutchin. And that's when the Hutchins were caterers, and they started successful catering businesses. They ended up with like 4 or 5 of them. And she had enough money to purchase the New Suffolk Hotel out here in New Suffolk. So that's kind of how they ended up back from Brooklyn into this area.
Okay. And then did your parents go through Mattituck High School?
No, they went through Southwold. I actually, I walked to kindergarten, to the East Cutchogue School, and there were 5 kids in my kindergarten class. The higher grades, 1st through 8th, were doubled. So we had 1 teacher for 1st and 2nd, and 1 teacher for 3rd and 4th. But by the time I got into 4th, the school consolidated with West Cutchogue. And then by the time I was in 8th grade, and most of the kids from this area were going to Southwold School, they consolidated again with Mattituck, and everyone went to Mattituck School. So that's how I ended up in Mattituck High School.
Oh, okay. And then you mentioned your connection to the New Suffolk Hotel. Could you talk a little bit more about that and how your family... Well, you did mention how they got involved in that, but just what you've learned about that hotel.
Sure. Well, being the executive director of the Cutchogue New Suffolk Historical Council, I was approached by the New Suffolk Waterfront Fund, and they asked me, they knew that my family was involved in the New Suffolk Hotel, and they asked me if I would do a talk on it. And honestly, I only knew a very little bit about it at the time. So I had to do a lot of genealogical and historical research to kind of put enough information together for a 1-hour talk. And that's kind of how I learned about it. And then I gave that talk, which, was about how we were connected to it. The hotel was built by Ira Tuttle, who founded New Suffolk. And very early on, he built the hotel, I believe in 1840. And at that time, people were coming from the city using packet sloops and stagecoaches because there was no train. But very, very soon, a train was put in around 1848. And Ira probably knew that when he created the hotel, because there was train service in the city at the time he built the hotel, and he probably anticipated it coming out here. So anyway, he owned that hotel for about 20 years when, as I said, Jane, who at this time was Jane Hutchin, my great-great-great-grandmother, purchased the hotel and had my great-great-grandfather, William, her son, run the hotel for her.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how kind of my family ended up out here. And William had his son, Andrew. He sent him to cooking school, which was very unusual at the time, but he learned to become a chef, and he ended up meeting his wife there, and who was already a chef. And the two of them were chefs at the hotel,
Mm-hmm.
and later in many other local hotels like the North Fork Country Club and the Nassau Point Hotel. So that's kind of how we got involved in the hotel.
And how long did your family operate the hotel?
They operated it from 1860, and then around 1890, they leased it out to a man named Grant, who kind of, what I like to say, Victorianized it. Like, he added all the curly cues and redid the interior to kind of make it more fashionable for people.
Mm-hmm.
And he was very successful with it for a while. And then Jane, my great-great-great-grandmother, who owned the hotel, died. And within her will, she just was like, the hotel had to be sold. So that's when it left the family. And so it was owned by my family from 1860 to 1899.
Okay. And then just moving ahead to your parents, could you tell us what they did for a living?
Yeah, my father worked at Grumman's for most of his life, and he was a volunteer fireman. Both my mother and father were involved in the fire department. We were there, including me and my brother, shucking corn at the very first chicken barbecue that they put on in, I think, 1958. And my father was also the commander of the Legion. My mother was in the auxiliary fire department and Legion. She was an LPN. She got involved in the school system and eventually became an administrator. Then she was a counselor in Quanticut in the hospital, Greenport Hospital. And then the two of us started a bed and breakfast in 2001. It was kind of a way of us keeping our family home that my great-grandfather built in the family for as long as we could. And we did eventually sell it in 2014. So
okay. And then getting to you, did you say you grew up more in, or because you said the school systems were merging at that time, or
yeah.
Were you growing up more in Southold or?
Well, my grandparents were in Southold, but I grew up in Cutchogue.
Okay.
You know, and I attended East Cutchogue, then West Cutchogue, and then Mattituck.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to college at Geneva College in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania.
And just, could you talk a little bit about what activities you might have done as a child, or the middle school or high school fun activities in the area?
We took advantage of everything that the area had to offer. Basically, from the time I was little, we spent our time mostly at the beach. The minute school got out, we were at the beach, and the minute we had to go back to school, that was when we were off the beach. But we did everything: swimming, sailing, boating, fishing, clamming, water skiing, all of those things that the area had to offer. And you know, my brother and I were close in age, so we were kind of like compatriots, and we went into the woods exploring and rode our bikes everywhere, just like all kids did at that time. So, and I guess I was a little odd because I was fascinated with the farming aspect out here, and I created an organic garden. I raised chickens and rabbits and pigeons and goats and all sorts of things. I kind of considered myself like a farmer of sorts. My father used to call me Dr. Doolittle. And yeah, it was a great place to grow up and to live. So, and we were in the Boy Scouts. We actually, my troop was one of the troops that went to Gardiner's Island for a week.
Okay.
So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah. And what about your schooling experience, even through middle school and high school? How was that experience? And did you have any role models or favorite teachers?
Oh, yeah, I definitely had a favorite teacher, Peggy Dow. Her name is Peggy Murphy now, but I always tell her that she was my favorite teacher. And, and then I, went on to college and studied professional psychology and counseling psychotherapies, and I majored in French, German, and journalism. And I was the school editor of the paper for 2 years, and I was accepted to go on to graduate school for psychology, but I had gotten bitten by the publishing bug, and I kind of changed courses with my career at that point and went into publishing. I had a graphic arts freelance business for most of my career, but that's what really I loved was graphic arts. But I was professionally in graphic arts for 6 months, and then I was almost immediately turned into a supervisor and then a manager. And that's how I got into publishing management, and my career went into most local papers like the Long Island Advance and Newsday. So I was at Newsday for 12 years.
And was that something, because you said psychology was what you did for your undergrad and into, but was that something you knew you wanted to do coming out of high school?
No, actually, I was really interested in languages, and I had picked a college that was very strong in languages. I wanted to be an interpreter. And what ended up happening was I was at the school for a year. I was taking psychology along with the languages, and I really liked it. And I liked the professors. The bottom fell out of the language department because they decided that computer was a language, and everybody abandoned the traditional languages and got into computers. That was the beginning of the transition to computers. So that's I had a choice. I either could go to another school or I could switch my major, and I decided to switch my major.
And also I ask people that have grown up out here, were at that age, were you looking to move away? And then, like, was it something some people want to, like, coming out of high school or going into college, like, I need to get out of where I grew up and go away and then eventually make your way back?
Well, like if there was a way that I could have stayed out here, I would have, because I loved it out here. I still love it out here.
Yeah.
But I moved up the island because that's where my career took me. I never liked the city. I hated the city. So my career kept calling me to the city for advancement. But I decided, to stay out here. In fact, I had been offered a job at the Wall Street Journal, or I could have moved out here and started a B&B. That was kind of my choice. And I chose to stay at Newsday and move out here and start a B&B rather than go in and work at the Wall Street Journal. So, and it was a good choice because my second day at work was when 9/11 happened, and would have happened to me because my parking place was underneath the World Trade Center.
Wow.
So I guess it was fortuitous that my path led back out here.
Yeah.
And I've been out here ever since, and I don't regret it at all. I love it out here.
And then also, we're going to get to your as executive director of the New Suffolk and Cutchogue Historical Society, but I was curious early on, was there a moment or influence early on in your life that drew you to history, or have you always been interested in it throughout your life?
I have always been interested in it. My mother's friend, B.J. Hasseldine, was part of the Cutchogue and Suffolk Historical Council. I think her husband was on the board, or maybe she was too. And when I was around 16, she convinced me to be a docent at the schoolhouse.
Mm-hmm.
And I did, and I loved it. And they trained me to be a docent at the old house. And it happened to be the bicentennial. And, I was 16 or 17, and they made such a big deal out of the bicentennial at that time and the history. And, it was just very exciting to me. History was exciting. But as in particular, local history. I love local history, maybe because my family was involved in it, and I see how local history is connected to American history and, part of the bigger picture. But it's just, those are the things that kind of really draw me to it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how I started. And then when we did do the B&B, we furnished it all in antiques and things that were passed down to us. So we kind of tried to create an old North Fork home situation for people to come out and experience it. And that was an extension of the history. And then when I moved to Mattituck, I moved right down the road from the Mattituck Historical Society. I inherited a quilt from the Duryea, Wyckoff, Bergen side of the family that was part of Mattituck's history, and I had meant to donate the quilt. And when I went to donate it, they kind of sucked me in, and I became a board member and a trustee and a volunteer, and got very involved in it, in that organization. We started with the collaboration with the North Fork Community Theater and Mary Mata. We started the graveyard tour about 8 years ago, and it's been a very successful event for them. And I brought it over to Cutchogue, and it's been a successful event for Cutchogue as well. So
nice. No, and I was curious, even when you came back out later to work out here and have the bed and breakfast, what were your thoughts even of the area from growing up out here to how it's changed over
how
there?
it's changed.
Yeah, even with, obviously there's still open space and a lot of the farms became vineyards.
Right.
But do you still feel like it has a similar feel to it?
It has changed a lot.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, it's changed for the good, and in some ways not. Depends on who you ask. But I remember when we first opened the B&B, Pindar had started doing operas, or little opera things, and I just thought that was so weird that that I was going to walk down the street to see an opera in a house, in a barn that I was climbing on potato mountains when I was a kid. so yeah, that was a very strange transition for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it has changed tremendously. I always say it's become like a Disney-fied version of the country.
Mm-hmm.
That's what it seems like to me. But
yeah,
I know people are trying to preserve the land and keep it the way it was, and I appreciate that too.
Yeah, it's just tough, I think, in terms of making money out here and
right,
making it work. But I think we'll touch on that later when we talk about the future of the North Fork. But you mentioned you were involved in the Mattituck Historical Society, but how did the opportunity come about for you to become executive director at the Cutchogue Historical Society?
Well, I got involved in Mattituck in 2018, and I was involved with them for a few years, and then COVID happened. And it was, basically I'd been involved in a weekly deadline situation for most of my career. And that can be very stressful. And I handled the stress pretty well, but it does kind of creep up on you. And I was considering, before COVID, I was considering early retirement. And then the stress of COVID, because basically I was literally putting together newspapers from my home office. And dealing with unruly salespeople on the telephone and difficult deadline situations and all sorts of things. So I decided that I would definitely retire early, and it worked out great because the timing and everything fell into place. And that's kind of how I started to work way more hours volunteering for the Suffolk Historical, and I really enjoyed it. And I knew I wanted to stay involved in local history, and the job posting came up for the executive director of the Cutchogue Historical, and I had that experience with them from when I was younger, and I just on a lark kind of went out and applied for it. I didn't know or really wasn't sure if I was going to get it. I just figured I'd apply for it, and it was part-time. I thought it would be a great retirement job, just to supplement my income and sort of enjoy it. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad I did, because I love it. So.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And then even since then, you've continued to do research about the area.
Mm-hmm.
I was interested if you had any other interesting stories that you've uncovered from your research, whether about even more so within Cutchogue area, with even historic hotels or clubs or gathering places.
Well, every year I try to do one presentation. I started with the orphan train talk because my family is connected with the orphan trains, and then I did the historic hotel talk.
Mm-hmm.
And that was interesting because in my research, I found that my great aunt Madeline was married at the Nassau Point Hotel, where her parents basically ran the hotel and were the chefs there. And through the research, I found incredible amount of detailed information about her wedding. I found the poem my great-grandfather wrote and used as a toast at the wedding. I found all the details, what she wore, what flowers she carried, who her bridesmaids were. There was a really detailed account of the wedding in the newspaper, and of the hotel itself, what they ate, who was invited, all of that stuff. It kind of made the whole thing come alive, in this event that was part of my family that I was, disconnected to by 75 years, mm-hmm. suddenly, became something that I could experience. I thought that was really interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I did the talk on the local historic buildings. What I found out about the schools was very interesting. How each town, New Suffolk, East Cutchogue, West Cutchogue, their progression of how the schools evolved on the timeline was extremely similar.
Mm-hmm.
From a one-room school to a two-room school to, a high school and all of that. So it just kind of progressed through history, and that was interesting. And the churches, they have a lot of interesting history as well. And then the buildings themselves house so much. And what I love too was a lot of these stories were interconnected. It wasn't just an isolated story of history, but this person who lived in this house was the pastor of this church who rebelled against the deacons because he was anti-slavery, and then they ended up breaking off and forming a church that became the library, and all of these things just were sort of interconnected, and I found that very interesting.
Mm-hmm. And I was curious, because you mentioned even with your family's hotel, but in Cutchogue, Was there always a lot people coming out, especially when the trains started coming out here? Were there tourists coming out pretty frequently at that time, or?
Yeah, the basically anyone who had any kind of money in New York City wanted to get out of the city for the summer.
Mm-hmm.
So they were either going upstate to the Catskills or out here. Out here in particular, what they call sporting tourism, which involved hunting, fishing, boating, that kind of thing, was extremely popular. There were gentlemen hunters and gentlemen fishers, and they would create these lodges and clubs for them. In fact, that was the club on Robbins Island, was a hunting lodge. And a lot of times they would refer to the north of the New Suffolk Hotel as the hunting lodge, because so many hunters were. And they would, and the proprietors of the hotels, they would procure guides for these people that came out to help them to facilitate their success in hunting. And at the time in history, there basically when the ducks flew, the sky was pretty much black with them. So you'd have to be a really bad hunter not to be successful in bagging a duck or two. So that, yeah, it was very, very popular. Sports tourism, that brought out a lot of people here.
And even, I was curious, just in your own experience, even growing up here, would you ever go over to Greenport or further out to Orient as a child or in high school?
Or we were all over the place.
Yeah, although you didn't just stay in
Well, we by bike, we pretty much stayed in East Cutchogue. But with our parents and family, we would, go to restaurants or, whatever. If they were having something, an event or something, we would go to that. So yeah, from Orient to Riverhead, we were pretty much all over. And the South Shore as well. We used to do every year Christmas shopping in Sag Harbor. We would take the boat over and do Christmas shopping in Sag Harbor. Nice. And then have, there was a little hotel, a little restaurant there named, I think, Spinnaker's. And they used to decorate the hotel with those little villages, not the hotel, the restaurant with villages. And that was where we would have like a little dinner or something while we Christmas shopped.
Also, could you talk a little bit about how the Historical Society, the history of the Historical Society got started, and even before you started working there?
Well, I feel like it kind of got started around 1938 when the Roosevelt regime had the Works Project, the WPA, and part of the WPA was the HABS project, which is the Historic Architect Building Survey. And basically what that did was that sent architectural historians out all across America to discover and get information on historic buildings. And they were on their way out here when they noticed the old house, and they went to the town and explained to them what an important piece of history that was. And it was right before the Southold Town's tricentenary celebration. And they decided that they were going to use the restoration of that house as the focal point for the celebration. And they created the Old House Society. And that's what maintained the old house from pretty much the 20th century. And then in 1960, apparently, someone from the Smithsonian was looking for information on the local indigenous people, and they sent a letter out, and basically the people of the area realized they really didn't know much about them. And that's why they formed the Cutchogue Historical, and that's why they call it a council, as kind of
not
a
society.
nod to, to the indigenous people. And They used this council to find out more about the history of the area and get people involved in it. They eventually got the village green and cleaned it up and moved the old schoolhouse from across the street to there. They moved the Wickham House and the Carriage House and the Red Barn, and that's pretty much their efforts. And they were all volunteers, and they did this all through volunteerism, all these huge, enormous projects. And that's why the village green in Cutchogue is as you see it today. And that's kind of how the Historical Council started. And if anyone wants more information, they can go to our website. It's cutchogue.newsuffolkhistory.org. And it explains how we got started. It gives you a timeline of the area from when the indigenous people were here up until the wineries. And we blog too. We have little historic oriented blogs on the site. So,
and I think that I've been to the site, and even I think Mattituck also has a green space.
Yes.
As well. And it's nice having those different buildings
right
on the lot. I think even just looking at Greenport, it'd be nice to have something like that here. But it's a nice place to host events, and I think because I think I wanted to get to that. You've hosted a lot of different events throughout the year, but you're also known for portraying a colonial gentleman during some of these events. Could you talk a little bit about that as well, and what inspired you to bring that history to life?
Well, I'm basically, and the volunteers, we're always trying to think of ways to get people interested in the local history through events, through things like the graveyard tour, where people are having fun, but they're learning about the local history. And our mission, a big part of our mission, is education. And anything we can do to make that more interesting is good. So basically, what I do is I do get dressed up as a colonial gentleman. It's not a costume; it's an actual reenactment clothing, which means that everything I'm wearing is an exact replica of what someone of that time period would have been wearing. Right down to the fact that some of the linen pieces that I wear are hand loomed, and buttons are made of bone. And so basically what I am is a living historian. And when kids are around, they have a tendency more to listen to somebody who's dressed up like me. When adults are around, I can explain what I'm wearing and, how it's significant to the history of the area, how people made it. It really kind of, especially one of the things we're focusing on in June is we recently donated a colonial barn loom and a significant quilt from East Cutchogue. And we're kind of focusing on the difficulty that the early settlers had in creating cloth, something that we take for granted, but there was no cotton trade when they came here. So basically they had to create linen and wool. And to create linen, they had to plant flax, they had to harvest the flax, they had to dry it, they had to red it, which means they had to soak it in a field of water. They had to separate the fibrous material from the organic material. Then they had to create something called flax wool. Then they had to spin it, and then they had to weave it. And once they had the cloth, then they had to make the clothing. So you can see it's a very long, and that's the abridged version. So it's a long and arduous process to make clothing. And that amongst many is one of the reasons why I try to show people what it meant to live in that time period.
And how has it been with recruiting new people to the council, and have you been able to get schools or classes to come over for educational programs as well? in that regard, separate from, I guess, because I asked two questions
Okay.
in that.
Well, the first part, volunteerism, unfortunately, volunteerism is declining not just for our organization, but for a lot of the nonprofits that are in the area. I think that has to do a lot with, there's a different type of person that's moving out here. They're here because they've retired and they want, and their retirement looks a lot different than the people who lived here when they retired. Because when the people that lived here retired, they were looking to get involved in the community. And a lot of the new people are looking to use this as a home base for travel. So that's just my theory.
Yeah.
But that could be what's going on. And we're like many other organizations, we're having a great deal of difficulty to get people to volunteer. And the people we do get to volunteer don't seem to want to take on big projects like the old volunteers did. They want to do something that's one day a week from 1 to 3 and then go home and that's the end of it. They don't want to like move a building or, do the things that the volunteers of the past used to do. And that's okay because we need all kinds of volunteers. But that does make things change for these organizations. A lot of them have realized that they have to take on paid employees in the place of volunteers or use the paid employees to create a structure for the volunteers. So the organizations are trying to evolve based on that, but that doesn't mean that they need volunteers any less. They still need volunteers. And we try to work as closely as possible with the schools. When I first came on board, we created what I call the youth initiative, which is basically kind of a 6-pronged plan, which includes off-the-shelf education program for using cemeteries as a teaching tool. It is connecting people with the scholarships that the Gardner Foundation has to offer, connecting people with the internships, the paid internships that Gardner Foundation offers. It's our day of learning on the green, where we kind of invite classes to come and spend the whole day on the village green. They experience what it was like to have a class in the schoolhouse. They go on the tours. They eat the lunches that a Colonial kid used to eat. And then they play Colonial games on the schoolhouse. And then we have our family history day. And we do workshops at the graveyard so that students are using their community service points that they need for college. And they clean the stones, and we teach them how to clean the stones, and they do things like that. And then I have just an open invitation to all of the schools to come for tours, not just the schools, but a lot of the there's a lot of summer programs that we invite to be part of history. We're now across the street from the Peconic School, and they've come over and done tours. So yeah, we're working with the kids all the time.
Nice. I was curious because I think also another thing that can be a challenge is funding. Do you get any money from the town, or do you have to generate all your revenue through events or other fundraising or grants?
Well, like all organizations, we focus on many different sources of funding. Predominantly, we have an endowment, but that is subject to the stock market, and lately it hasn't been very kind to us. But in order to supplement, we have recently changed our name to the Cutchogue Suffolk Historical Society and Museums, and by having the word museums in our name, which we are a museum, it makes us eligible for tax-based funding, but we have to present that to the community, and they have to vote on it. And we are hoping that either this year or more likely next year, we will have access to that type of funding as well. And yes, I do go for grants. I go for county grants and Gardner grants. I'm right now, I've applied for a grant to help restore the old burying ground. So professionals will be able to pay professionals to come in and restore some of the more damaged stones. And we're focusing on, because of the semi-quincentennial, the 250th anniversary, we have 10 Revolutionary War vets buried in that cemetery, and their stones are not in good shape. So we're kind of focusing on restoring their stones. And we just recently had an event a couple weeks ago that was the anniversary of the Battle of Lexington and Concord, where the Sons of the American Revolution donated a plaque, and we had a dedication ceremony for that, where we had Colonial reenactors come and fire off a shot as each one of the Revolutionary War veterans' names were read by Albert Krupski, the town supervisor. So
yeah, wonderful.
It was a very nice event.
Yeah.
So.
And then I was curious if you're excited, or if you have any other exciting projects or events coming up in the future.
Yeah, we I think I alluded to the fact that our opening day in June 14th, which is Flag Day, we are going to change it up a little bit. We usually have our Family History Day, but because of the donation of the loom and the quilt, we're going to have an event called the Fabric of Time, where we focus on that process of creating fabric. We're showing people how it was done, right from the flax to the loom. And then after that, in August, I'm very excited about, we're having a reenactment battle, which is a war reenactment between the British and the Patriots. We've had reenactment events before, but it's mostly just an encampment. And this is our first reenactment battle, which is going to be on the 250th anniversary of a battle that occurred off of Oyster Ponds.
Wow.
It's really more of a skirmish, but that's what we're going to be kind of commemorating on that day. And that's kind of like a bucket list thing for me. I'm very excited about seeing an actual, reenactment of a battle. And then we're having our free concerts on the green. I'm trying to revive the Douglas Moore. Douglas Moore is a local to Cutchogue. He is a Pulitzer Prize winning composer who's no longer with us, and they've had his memorial concert on the green for I think over 30 years. And about 8 or 9 years ago, the Douglas Moore Foundation kind of dissolved, and that was the end of that. So I'm trying to revive that, and that's really dependent on whether or not the Sound Symphony can get a hold of some of his music and play it at the event. And then we're going to have our auto show and in September, and the graveyard tour, and the paranormal event, which is basically we have paranormal investigators come and do investigations on the village green in the old house, the schoolhouse, and the Wickham House. And people can come and participate in that. And we just had a summary of that last month, where they revealed their findings as to the level of hauntedness of each place. So
nice. That sounds fun. And I think that reenactment event sounds really cool.
I'm looking forward to that.
And I was just even curious, just with the history of the area in that regards. I think I've heard that the North Fork, I think it was more British focused, and that the West was more Dutch based. But
yes. Yeah.
were they Tories that they would call them out here? They tended to side more with the British.
Well, that's a point of controversy.
Okay, we don't have to.
No, but basically, the loyalists were. There was an oath that they had to sign to the king, and a lot of people that signed the oath just signed it to sort of get them off their backs, but they still worked for the patriot cause, even though they had signed that oath. And a lot of them were loyalists. We are connected to. We feel that we have a very strong connection to the American Revolution in that the owner of the old house at one point was Parker Wickham, who was a loyalist, and he was exiled after the war was over. And Jared Landon, who was a patriot, took over his house. And there's a document that we have that we keep at the history room in the Cutchogue Library that basically the original document that kind of outlines that transfer. So yeah, that's our little connection to the American Revolution.
Nice. And then I think I had two other questions. Just looking at the North Fork today, and you've been living out here for a while now and grew up here, but just looking back, what have you enjoyed most, or what do you enjoy most about living and working out here?
Well, I always think back to when COVID was at its worst, and I saw what was going on TV and everything, and I felt very blessed to be out here in the middle of nature, to be able to walk my dog past the water and not really have to worry about all the things they had to worry about up the island and in the city, and how beautiful it was out here, the nature. And, I'm very lucky. My house is right on an estuary, and, we're overlooking the woods and the birds and, just the wildlife. And it's just an incredible place to live. I walk down New Suffolk Avenue to Minnow and have lunch and watch the sailboat races. It doesn't really get any better than that for me. So
yeah. And now, just looking to the future, what do you hope for the future of the North Fork and its community further down the line? It can be in terms of the history and preservation of the area, but also just in general, your thoughts for the future of the community.
Well, I'm happy to see the direction they've taken in land preservation. I think that's very important. As a historian, I am concerned with historic preservation, and I'm concerned that that's not going in the direction that I'd like it to. But it's like it depends on the political will and the will of the people. Like, if the people make it clear to the government that that's important, then hopefully it will become important. And it's people like me and other historians kind of explaining and showing people how it is important, and how, it does affect your neighborhood and your community and your way of life and the way, things are out here, to have the history of the area preserved. And make those connections and show people how it is important. And then hopefully the people will follow through.
Yes. And then just lastly, was there anything else you wanted to say or discuss, even touching on the Historical Society, or how other people might be able to get involved? Or you mentioned the website, but anything else you'd like to say about that?
Yeah, they can email me at cutchoguehistory@gmail.com if they're interested in volunteering. They can get involved in many different ways. Everyone thinks, if I volunteer, they're going to make me a docent. Well, if you wanted to become a docent, that's great, but you don't have to be. There are many different things. We need people on the board, and I know that might sound boring, but it's not, and it's not. It's kind of like you're guiding the path of the society, and showing, how, your input is in how it proceeds and the decisions it makes. Like, there was recently a thing on social media where someone was, complaining about they used an asphalt roof in Halleckville instead of, or somewhere instead of a cedar shake roof. Well, that's great. So maybe if you don't like it, then you should get involved and, change the course of making those types of decisions. Anyone can do it. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be a historian. You don't have to even, you don't even have to be that interested in history. It's just it's a group that, you can get involved in. It's a community-oriented group. And really, that's another thing that our organization is there for. We're there to maintain the Village Green and to keep it active for the community. And we're not the only organization that has events on the Village Green. The Old Town Arts Guild, and he has an event there 3 times a year. We have it open to the library, basically coordinating with me. The library can have any events that they want on the green, and they take advantage of that for quite a while and very often. So yeah, that's kind of a big deal. The green is not owned by the town. It's owned by us. And people's donations to our organization help not only maintain the Village Green, but they help maintain the old burying ground, which is one of the oldest sites on Long Island for the local colonists to be buried, particularly second-generation colonists that were in Cutchogue. And a lot of the tombs that are at that site, they're the only source of historical information for the people that are buried there. And we have taken the time to create a survey of the site, and we have taken the data from that survey and uploaded it to billiongraves.com, so it becomes a searchable database for anyone doing genealogical research. So we're doing all of this with the money that people donate through, and through grants and things like that. But, so we're not just sitting there.
Yeah. No, definitely.
We're trying to get as involved in the community as possible. So when you get involved with us, you're getting involved with your community, and we appreciate that.
Definitely. No, that's really important. But no, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come on today and share your story and talk about this wonderful organization and your work in preserving and keeping the history of the North Fork and Cutchogue going. So
thanks again for having me.
Thank you. Well, I hope you enjoyed episode 148 with Mark MacNish. I want to thank you for listening to the Floyd Memorial Library podcast, and we'll see you next time.